Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. The rain started just after we pitched our tent. It was gentle at first, just a light patter on the fabric. Lucy and I looked at each other and laughed. We thought it would pass soon. But within an hour, it was coming down in sheets, turning the ground into mud. We decided to stay inside and wait it out. By evening, it was clear the rain wasn't stopping. The steady downpour became a roar. Water started seeping into the tent. We knew we had to move. The creek nearby was rising fast, and I could hear it turning into a torrent. I grabbed our flashlight and some gear, and we stepped out into the storm. The water was already ankle deep, and it was hard to see more than a few feet ahead. We headed towards higher ground, struggling to keep our balance in the slick mud. Lightning flashed, illuminating the forest in stark, bright light. Thunder followed, shaking the ground under our feet. We pushed through the rain, soaked to the skin and shivering. I could see the creek now, a raging river where a gentle stream had been. We had to get away from it. The only option was to climb the hill behind our campsite. It was steep and slippery, but we had no choice. Halfway up, we found a ledge. It was narrow but offered some shelter from the worst of the rain. We collapsed on it, catching our breath. We weren't alone. A group of 4 other campers was already there, huddled together under a makeshift tarp. They watched us warily as we approached. "Do you mind if we join you?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the storm. A man, presumably the leader, shook his head. "There's no room," he said flatly. "Find your own spot." Lucy looked at me, fear in her eyes. I tried to reason with them. "Please, it's just for a little while. We'll stay on the edge." The leader stepped forward, his face hard. I said no. "We have our own problems. Now go." I felt a mix of anger and desperation. We had nowhere else to go. But I could see in his eyes that arguing was pointless. They were scared too, and fear makes people selfish. I turned to Lucy, and we moved further up the hill, looking for any kind of shelter. We found a small overhang, barely enough to keep us out of the rain. The ground was soaked, and water was still trickling in, but it was better than nothing. We huddled together, trying to stay warm. Hours passed. The rain showed no sign of stopping. Every so often, I checked our surroundings, making sure the water wasn't rising too high. The creek had turned into a river, and the sound of rushing water filled the air. I kept thinking about the other campers. What if they changed their minds? What if they decided to come after us? Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the forest. I looked down and saw a tree had fallen across the creek, creating a makeshift bridge. The water was rising, and it was only a matter of time before it reached us. I knew we had to move again. "Lucy, we need to go," I said, shaking her awake. "The water's coming up." She nodded, her face pale. We climbed higher, slipping and sliding in the mud. The storm seemed relentless. Every step was a struggle, and my heart pounded in my chest. We reached another ledge, higher and safer. But as we settled down, I saw movement below. The other campers were leaving their spot, climbing towards us. The leader looked up, his face grim. "They're coming," I whispered to Lucy. "We need to keep moving." We continued our climb, exhaustion setting in. The storm was unending, and every part of my body ached. We reached a large rock formation, offering better shelter. We squeezed into a narrow gap, finally feeling some relief from the rain. The other group was still below, struggling up the hill. They were getting closer. I felt a knot of fear in my stomach. I knew they would try to take our spot. I looked around, trying to find a way out. Then, an idea hit me. There was a narrow path leading around the rock, almost invisible in the dark. It was risky, but it might lead to another safe spot. "Lucy, follow me," I said, and we squeezed through the gap. We edged along the path, the rock pressing against our backs. The drop on the other side was steep, but we had no choice. We moved slowly, careful not to slip. The sound of the storm was muffled here, and for a moment, I felt a strange calm. We found another ledge, wider and safer. We climbed up, our hands raw from the rough rock. As we settled in, I heard voices below. The other campers had reached our old spot. They were arguing, their voices loud and angry. "We should have let them stay," one of them said. "Now look at us." "It's too late for that," the leader snapped. "Just keep moving." I felt a small sense of vindication, but knew it wouldn't last. We were all just trying to survive. Lucy and I huddled together, the rain still pouring down. We were safe for now, but I knew we had to stay alert. The night dragged on, each minute feeling like an hour. The rain finally began to let up just before dawn. The sky lightened, and I could see the damage the storm had caused. The creek had overflowed, and the forest floor was a mess of mud and debris. We waited until it was fully light before making our way down. The other campers were gone, their makeshift camp abandoned. I felt a mix of relief and sadness. We had made it through the night, but I wondered if they had. Lucy and I walked back to our campsite, finding it half flooded. We gathered what we could and started the long trek back to our car. The forest was eerily quiet now, the storm's fury replaced by an uneasy calm. As we drove away, I looked back at the forest. It would be a long time before I felt like camping again. I set up my tent quickly as the rain began to fall. The storm had been brewing all afternoon, and I was alone in the forest, miles from the nearest town. The sound of the rain on the tent was soothing at first, but as night fell, it turned into a relentless drumming. I lay on my sleeping bag, listening to the wind howl and the trees creak. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. I thought I heard something outside. I lay still, listening. There it was again, a rustling sound, close to my tent. My heart started to pound. I reached for my flashlight, careful not to make any noise. I clicked it on and shone it at the tent wall, but the rain was so loud I couldn't hear anything else. Then I saw it, a shadow moving outside the tent. I froze, holding my breath. The shadow moved closer, and I could see a hand pressing against the tent fabric. Panic set in. I tried to remember if I had locked my car, which was parked a short distance away. I couldn't recall. I heard a voice, low and urgent. "Hey, I need shelter." "Let me in," the voice said. The voice didn't sound right. There was something off about it, something that made my skin crawl. I didn't answer. I hoped whoever it was would think the tent was empty and move on. But the shadow stayed. The hand moved to the zipper of the tent, and I heard the slow, deliberate sound of it being pulled down. "Please, let me in." "It's pouring out here," the voice insisted, more forcefully this time. I grabbed the small camping knife I kept in my bag. My hands were shaking. The zipper stopped halfway down, and the rain started to pour into the tent. I could see the outline of a man now, crouched at the entrance. His silhouette was distorted by the flashlight beam, making him look even more menacing. "Go away!" I shouted, my voice trembling. "I have a knife." The man paused. There was a moment of silence, broken only by the sound of the rain. Then he spoke again, calmer this time. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just need to get out of the rain," he said. Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. I knew I couldn't let him in. I had to get out of there. I slipped on my boots and grabbed my backpack, all while keeping an eye on the figure outside. He was still crouched there, waiting. I decided to make a run for it. I took a deep breath, then lunged for the tent flap, shoving the man aside as hard as I could. He fell back with a grunt, and I scrambled out into the storm. The rain was blinding, but I didn't stop. I ran towards my car, slipping and stumbling in the mud. I heard him shouting behind me, but I didn't look back. My car was where I had left it, and I fumbled with the keys, my hands slick with rain. I finally got the door open and threw myself inside, locking the doors just as he reached the car. He pounded on the window, his face twisted with anger. "Let me in," he screamed, but I could see now that his eyes were wild, his clothes torn and dirty. He didn't look like someone who just needed shelter. He looked dangerous. I started the car and threw it into reverse, backing away from him as fast as I could. He chased after me, slipping in the mud, but I didn't stop. I sped down the narrow forest road, my heart racing, the rain hammering against the windshield. I drove for miles, not daring to slow down. When I finally reached a small town, I pulled into a gas station and parked under the bright lights. I was shaking all over, my clothes soaked through. I called the police and told them what had happened. They said they would send someone to check the area. I waited at the gas station until dawn, too scared to go back. When the police arrived, they took my statement and went to look for the man, but they didn't find him. They said the storm had probably driven him away, but I wasn't so sure. I never went camping alone again. Paul, Dana, and I were camping deep in the woods. It had been raining all day, a steady, cold drizzle that soaked everything. We had set up our tents and tried to get a fire going, but the wood was too wet. As night fell, we decided we needed more dry wood. Paul volunteered to go look for some, taking a flashlight and his rain jacket. He promised he wouldn't go far. The rain picked up, turning into a heavy downpour. Dana and I stayed in our tent, talking and waiting for Paul. We didn't think much of the time passing until it had been over an hour. I checked my watch and frowned. It shouldn't have taken him that long. We started to get worried. "We should go look for him," Dana said. I agreed, and we grabbed our flashlights and rain gear. We left our tent, the cold rain instantly soaking through our clothes. The forest was dark and eerily quiet except for the sound of the rain. We called out for Paul as we walked, our voices swallowed by the rain. The beam from our flashlights cut through the darkness, but it was hard to see far. The forest seemed to close in around us. We walked in the direction Paul had gone, keeping an eye out for any sign of him. We found his flashlight first. It was lying in the mud, still on. I picked it up and showed it to Dana. She looked scared. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer. We kept going, now calling out louder, our voices edged with panic. Then we saw something that made my blood run cold. There were drag marks in the mud, leading away from the trail. I pointed them out to Dana, and we followed them, our hearts pounding. The marks led to a small clearing. In the middle of the clearing, there was a large tree, its trunk gnarled and twisted. At the base of the tree, we found Paul's rain jacket, torn and muddy. There were also strange marks on the tree, like someone had scratched it deeply. "Paul!" Dana screamed, but there was no answer. We looked around, shining our flashlights in every direction. The rain was relentless, making it hard to see or hear anything. Then we found blood. It was mixed with the rainwater, forming dark streaks in the mud. My stomach turned, and I felt a wave of fear wash over me. Dana was crying, but we had to keep going. We followed the blood, our flashlights shaking in our hands. The trail led us to an old, abandoned cabin. The door was hanging off its hinges, and the windows were broken. It looked like no one had been there in years. We approached cautiously, our footsteps squelching in the mud. Inside, the cabin was dark and musty. There was a strong smell of decay. We moved our flashlights around, searching for any sign of Paul. In the corner, we found a pile of old clothes and blankets. Dana gasped and pointed. There was a hand sticking out from under the pile. We rushed over and started pulling the blankets away. It was Paul. He was unconscious, but he was alive. There were bruises on his face and arms, and his clothes were torn. We tried to wake him up, but he didn't respond. We heard a noise behind us. Turning quickly, we saw a shadow move across the doorway. Someone was outside, watching us. Dana and I froze, our hearts racing. I grabbed a piece of wood from the floor, ready to defend us. The shadow moved closer, and a man stepped into the cabin. He was tall and thin, with wild eyes and dirty clothes. He looked at us and smiled, a twisted, menacing smile. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. "We're leaving," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "We're taking our friend and leaving." The man laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "I don't think so," he said, stepping closer. I swung the piece of wood at him, but he was fast. He grabbed it and shoved me hard, sending me crashing into the wall. Dana screamed, and the man lunged at her. She tried to fight him off, but he was too strong. I struggled to my feet and tackled him, knocking him away from Dana. We wrestled on the floor, the rain pounding on the roof above us. I managed to grab a rock and hit him on the head. He grunted and fell back, dazed. "Help me with Paul," I shouted to Dana. We lifted Paul and dragged him out of the cabin. The man was starting to recover, and we didn't have much time. We stumbled through the rain, heading back towards our camp. We didn't stop until we reached our tent. We laid Paul down and checked his injuries. He was starting to come around, groaning in pain. I looked back towards the forest, but there was no sign of a man. We packed up quickly, not wanting to stay a moment longer. Paul was weak, but he could walk with our help. We made our way back to the car, the rain finally starting to let up. When we reached the car, we drove straight to the nearest town and went to the hospital. Paul was treated for his injuries, and we told the police everything that had happened. They searched the forest and found the cabin, but the man was gone. We were all shaken by the experience. I couldn't stop thinking about that man, and what he might have done if we hadn't found Paul in time. The forest, once a place of peace and beauty, now felt dangerous and haunted. It started to rain just after I finished setting up my tent. The steady drumming on the canvas was kind of soothing at first. I was alone in a secluded spot I found by the river, looking forward to a quiet night. I'd had a long week and needed the break. As the evening went on, the rain got heavier. I sat under the small awning I'd rigged up, cooking some instant noodles on my little camp stove. The night was pitch black beyond the circle of light from my lantern, and the sound of the rain was almost deafening. I was halfway through my meal when I saw lights in the distance. At first, I thought it was another camper, but then I realized the lights were too bright and moving too fast. They were coming towards me. My heart started to race. I wasn't supposed to be here. I'd seen the private property signs but figured no one would care. Now it looked like I was wrong. The lights came closer, and I could make out voices. Angry voices. I quickly doused my stove and lantern, plunging myself into darkness. Maybe they wouldn't see me. The lights kept coming, though. Flashlights, and a lot of them. Then I heard footsteps sloshing through the mud. I crouched low, trying to make myself invisible. The rain was still pouring, making it hard to see or hear clearly. "Who's there?" a voice shouted. It was deep and rough. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. "We saw your light. Come out now." Another voice, just as rough. I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever. They were almost at my camp. I took a deep breath and stood up, hands raised. "I'm sorry," I shouted over the rain. "I didn't know this was private property. I'll leave right away." They pointed their flashlights at me, blinding me. I could see the outline of 3 men. They were holding guns. "What are you doing here?" the first man demanded. "Camping," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm just camping. I didn't mean any harm." The men looked at each other, then back at me. One of them stepped forward and grabbed my backpack, rifling through it. "You spying on us?" he asked, throwing my stuff on the ground. No, I swear. "I'm just here to camp," I said. "Bullshit," another man said. "You're on private land. What's your real reason for being here?" I couldn't think. My mind was a blur of fear. "I didn't know," I repeated. "I'm sorry. I'll leave right now." The first man, who seemed to be the leader, came closer. I could see his face now, rough and scarred. "It's not that simple," he said. "You've seen too much." "Seen what?" "I haven't seen anything," I pleaded. They didn't believe me. They talked among themselves, voices low and serious. I caught bits and pieces. "Can't let him go. Might have called someone. What if he's lying?" "I don't know anything," I shouted, desperate. "Please, just let me go." The leader turned back to me, his eyes cold. "We can't take that chance," he said. "You're coming with us." They grabbed me, roughly binding my hands with rope. My heart pounded as they led me through the rain, away from my campsite. I stumbled and slipped in the mud, but they didn't slow down. We reached a clearing with a small cabin. They pushed me inside, the door slamming shut behind us. The cabin was dark and musty, with old furniture covered in dust. "Sit," the leader commanded, shoving me onto a chair. I sat, my mind racing. I had to think of a way out, but I was terrified. The men started questioning me again, but my answers didn't satisfy them. They were convinced I was spying on them for some reason. I saw a small window behind me, partially open. It was a slim chance, but maybe I could get out. They were distracted, arguing among themselves. I inched the chair back slowly, trying not to make a sound. "What are you doing?" one of them snapped, noticing my movement. "Nothing, just uncomfortable," I said quickly. The leader walked over and slapped me hard. "Don't try anything," he growled. I nodded, trying to stay calm. But inside, I was panicking. They went back to their argument, and I saw my chance. I waited until they were all looking away, then I bolted. I shoved the chair back and dove for the window. My hands were still tied, but I managed to wriggle through. "Hey," one of them shouted. I hit the ground hard, but I didn't stop. I got up and ran, the rain blinding me. I heard them behind me, shouting and crashing through the underbrush. I ran for my life, not knowing where I was going. The rain was my only cover, the darkness my only ally. I stumbled and fell more times than I could count, but I kept going. I had to get away. Eventually, I found a road. I didn't know which way to go, but I chose a direction and ran. A car came by, and I waved it down. The driver stopped, looking at me with wide eyes. "Help me, please," I gasped. They let me in, and I collapsed in the back seat, soaked and exhausted. The driver took me to the nearest town, where I called the police. They went back to the property, but the men were gone. The rain started in the evening, a gentle patter on the tent's roof that soon turned into a relentless downpour. Jake and I were camping on a hillside, and we didn't think much of the rain at first. It was just another part of the adventure. But as the night wore on, the sound of the rain grew louder, more intense. We woke up to a loud rumble that shook the ground. It took us a moment to realize what was happening. A rock slide. I felt the tent lurch as debris hit the side, and Jake grabbed my arm, pulling me closer. "Stay still," he whispered. "It might pass." But it didn't. The rocks kept coming, pressing against the tent walls, making it harder to breathe. We could hear the grinding of stones, the thud of heavier boulders, and the hiss of the rain. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was racing. "We need to get out," I said, my voice shaking. Jake nodded. "We have to dig our way out. If the tent collapses, we're done for." We started to move, carefully pushing against the debris. The tent was already starting to buckle under the weight. I could see the fabric stretching, tearing in places. The air inside felt thick, hard to breathe. I reached for the small camping shovel we had brought, handing it to Jake. He started to dig at the entrance, trying to clear a path. I used my hands, scooping away the smaller rocks, feeling the sharp edges cut into my skin. It was slow going. The mud and rocks were heavy, and the rain kept coming. I could feel the tent shifting around us, the ground beneath us unstable. Every time a large rock moved, it felt like the whole hillside was about to give way. "Keep going," Jake said, his voice strained. "We're almost there." I wasn't sure if he was trying to convince me or himself. My arms were aching, my hands raw from the digging. But I kept going. I had to. There was no other choice. Suddenly, a large boulder shifted, and the tent sagged even more. I heard Jake curse under his breath. We were running out of time. "We need to move faster," he said. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I dug faster, ignoring the pain in my hands, the cold seeping into my bones. I could see a sliver of light, a small gap in the debris. We were getting closer. Then, just as I thought we might make it, the ground shifted again. The entrance collapsed, the rocks pressing in on us from all sides. The tent was now more like a coffin, trapping us inside. "Emily!" Jake shouted, his voice panicked. "Are you okay?" "I'm here," I said, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "I'm here." "We have to find another way," he said. We can't stay here. I started to dig again, but my movements were slower, more desperate. The air was getting thinner, harder to breathe. I could feel the walls closing in, the weight of the rocks pressing down on us. "Jake, I don't know if I can do this," I said, my voice breaking. "Yes, you can," he said. "We're getting out of here. Just keep going." I took a deep breath and kept digging. My fingers were numb, my arms felt like lead. But I kept going. I had to. After what felt like hours, we finally broke through. A small hole, just big enough to squeeze through. Jake went first, pulling himself out into the rain. I followed, feeling the cool air hit my face, the rain washing away the dirt and sweat. We crawled out of the wreckage, collapsing onto the muddy ground. The rain was still coming down, but I didn't care. We were out. We were alive. Jake pulled me close, his arms wrapped around me. "We made it," he said, his voice shaking. "We made it." I nodded, too exhausted to speak. The hillside was a mess, rocks and mud everywhere. Our tent was buried, the camping gear scattered. But we were alive. We had made it out. And as the rain continued to pour, I held onto Jake, grateful for the chance to breathe again. It had been raining steadily since morning. Laura and I had set up our campsite deep in the woods, hoping for a quiet weekend away from everything. By afternoon, the rain turned heavier, drumming against the tent and making everything damp and cold. Despite the weather, we decided to explore a bit, thinking the rain would add a bit of adventure to our hike. We walked for about an hour, trying to enjoy the forest despite being soaked. The path was muddy, and our boots squished with every step. We were about to turn back when we noticed a faint trail leading up the main path. Curious, we followed it. After a few minutes, we stumbled upon another campsite. It was hidden well, surrounded by trees and bushes. There were 2 tents and a tarp stretched between them, forming a makeshift shelter. It looked different from our simple setup, more permanent, almost as if someone had been living there for a while. As we got closer, we saw 3 men standing under the tarp, talking in low voices. They were dressed in heavy jackets and boots, looking prepared for the weather. Something about them seemed off. They looked rough, with unkempt beards and hard expressions. Laura grabbed my arm, whispering, "We should go." I nodded, but as we turned to leave, one of the men looked up and saw us. His eyes narrowed, and he said something to the others. They all turned to stare at us. My heart started pounding. We had intruded on their hidden spot, and it was clear they didn't want us there. "Hey," one of them shouted. "What are you doing here?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "We're just hiking. We didn't mean to bother you." "Come here," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Laura and I exchanged a worried glance, but did as he said. We walked towards them, trying to appear calm. The men watched us closely, their eyes cold and calculating. "What are you doing out here?" the man asked again, his voice hard. "We're camping nearby," I said. "We saw the trail and got curious." "That's all." The men exchanged looks. One of them, a tall guy with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. "This is private property. You shouldn't be here." "We didn't know," Laura said quickly. "We'll leave right now." The man with the scar shook his head. "I don't think so. You've seen too much." My stomach dropped. "Seen what?" "We haven't seen anything." "Exactly," the scarred man said. "And it's going to stay that way." Before we could react, he grabbed Laura's arm, pulling her towards one of the tents. I lunged at him, trying to free her, but the other two men grabbed me, holding me back. They were strong, and I couldn't break free. "Let her go!" I shouted, struggling against their grip. "Shut up," one of the men growled. "You're not going anywhere." They dragged us to their campsite, forcing us to sit under the tarp. The rain was still pouring, making the situation even more surreal. The scarred man kept his grip on Laura, his expression menacing. "What do you want from us?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Just stay quiet," the scarred man said. "We're not going to hurt you if you cooperate." The men started discussing something in low voices, occasionally glancing at us. I tried to listen, but the rain and their hushed tones made it hard to understand. All I could catch were fragments of their conversation, something about a job, keeping quiet, and not taking any chances. Laura squeezed my hand, her eyes wide with fear. I tried to reassure her with a look, but I was just as scared. These men were dangerous, and we were at their mercy. After what felt like hours, the men seemed to come to a decision. The scarred man walked over to us, his expression grim. "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to let you go, but you need to leave now and forget you ever saw us. Understand?" We nodded quickly, desperate to get away. "If we see you again, or if you tell anyone about us, you won't be so lucky next time." They shoved us towards the path we had come from. Laura and I didn't waste a second. We ran, slipping and stumbling through the mud, the rain blinding us. We didn't stop until we were back at our own campsite, gasping for breath. We packed up our things as quickly as we could, not saying a word. The fear was still too raw, too immediate. Once we were back in the car, driving away from the forest, Laura finally spoke. "What were they hiding?" "I don't know," I said, my hands still shaking. "But we're not going to find out." We drove in silence, the rain pounding on the roof of the car. Whatever those men were hiding, it was clear we had narrowly escaped something terrible. All I could think about was getting as far away from that place as possible and never looking back. I was deep in the forest when the rain began. It started as a drizzle, but soon it was pouring down, soaking everything. I had set up my tent earlier in a small clearing, trying to get some shelter from the trees. I had food, dry clothes, and a small fire going. It was supposed to be a peaceful trip, just me and nature. I went out to gather more firewood before dark. The rain made it hard to see, and the ground was slippery. I didn't stray far from the tent, not wanting to get lost. When I got back, my heart sank. The tent was open, and my supplies were gone. My food, clothes, and even my sleeping bag all taken. Panic set in. I looked around, hoping to see who had done this, but there was no one. The rain was falling harder now, and I was getting cold. Without my supplies, I wouldn't last the night. I had to find the thieves and get my things back. I grabbed a sturdy branch as a makeshift weapon and started following the muddy footprints leading away from my campsite. The rain was relentless, washing away the tracks almost as fast as I could follow them. I moved quickly, hoping to catch up before the trail disappeared completely. After a while, I saw a faint light through the trees. I approached cautiously, trying to stay quiet despite the rain. The light came from another campsite, hidden in a dense thicket. There were two men sitting by a fire, my supplies scattered around them. They were laughing and eating my food, oblivious to the misery they had caused. I crept closer, staying in the shadows. My heart was pounding, and I could barely breathe. I had to give my stuff back, but there were two of them and only one of me. I needed a plan. The branch in my hand felt flimsy, but it was all I had. The men were talking loudly, their voices muffled by the rain. I could hear bits and pieces of their conversation, something about splitting up the supplies and heading out in different directions. I knew I had to act fast, or I would lose everything. I picked up a rock and threw it into the bushes on the other side of their camp. The noise made them jump, and they stood up, looking around nervously. I took the chance to move closer, staying low to the ground. They were distracted, and I needed to take advantage of that. When one of them walked towards the noise, I lunged at the other with the branch. I hit him hard on the back, and he fell forward, stunned. The other men turned, and I swung the branch again, catching him on the arm. He shouted and stumbled back, tripping over the firewood. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed my backpack and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. The rain was still coming down hard, and I could barely see where I was going. I just knew I had to get away from them. I ran for what felt like hours, my clothes soaked and my body trembling with cold and fear. I didn't stop until I was sure I had put enough distance between us. Finally, I found a small cave and crawled inside, trying to catch my breath. I took stock of what I had managed to recover. Most of my food was gone, but I had my sleeping bag and some dry clothes. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get me through the night. I changed into the dry clothes and huddled in the sleeping bag, trying to get warm. I couldn't stop thinking about those men, how they had taken everything and laughed about it. I was angry and scared, but I knew I had to get out of there by morning. As morning came, I packed up and trekked back. Luckily, I did not see the men on the way. The rain was relentless, turning the forest into a maze of mud and water. I had set out early, confident I could complete the trail by dusk. But as the day wore on, the rain came down harder, washing away the trail markers. I tried to backtrack, but every path looked the same. Panic started to set in. I was lost. I pushed through the underbrush, hoping to find a familiar landmark or a dry spot to rest. My clothes were soaked, and my feet were slipping in the mud. The sun was setting, and the forest was growing darker by the minute. Just as I was about to give up hope, I saw a faint light through the trees. I stumbled toward it, praying it was a sign of civilization. The light came from a small cabin, tucked away in a dense thicket. Relief washed over me as I approached, but something felt off. The cabin looked old and neglected, but it was my only option. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Desperate, I tried the handle. The door creaked open. Inside, the cabin was dimly lit by a single oil lamp. It smelled musty, and the furniture was sparse and worn. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" My voice echoed through the small space, but there was no response. I stepped inside, hoping to find a phone or some way to contact help. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I whirled around to see a man standing there. He was tall and gaunt, with wild eyes and a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in years. His clothes were ragged, and he held a shotgun in one hand. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. I got lost in the storm," I stammered. "I just need a place to stay until it passes." He eyed me suspiciously. "This is my cabin. No one comes here. No one is supposed to know about this place." I tried to calm my racing heart. "I didn't know. I just found it by accident. Please, I don't mean any harm." He didn't lower the shotgun. You can't leave. Not now that you know where this place is. Fear gripped me. I won't tell anyone, I swear. I just want to get home. He shook his head. No one leaves here. You're staying. I backed away, looking for an escape route. The cabin was small, with just one window and the door he was blocking. Please, I begged. I promise I won't say anything. He stepped closer, his eyes wild. No one leaves, he repeated. I turned and ran for the window, but he was faster. He grabbed me and threw me to the ground. I scrambled to my feet, but he was on me again, pinning me down. You can't leave, he hissed. I fought back, kicking and scratching, but he was strong. I managed to break free for a moment and grabbed a chair, swinging it at him. It connected, and he stumbled back, giving me a chance to run for the door. I yanked it open and fled into the rain. I didn't stop running, even as the rain pelted down harder. I could hear him shouting behind me, but I didn't look back. The forest was a blur of trees and mud, but I kept going, driven by sheer terror. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were going to give out, but I couldn't stop. Eventually, I found a small cave and crawled inside, trying to catch my breath. I listened for any sounds of pursuit, but all I could hear was the rain. I huddled there, shivering and soaked, praying he wouldn't find me. Hours passed, and the rain finally let up. I cautiously made my way out of the cave, listening for any signs of danger. The forest was silent, and there was no sign of the hermit. I stumbled through the woods, hoping to find the trail or some sign of civilization. Just as dawn was breaking, I saw a ranger station in the distance. I ran toward it, relief flooding through me. I banged on the door, and a ranger opened it, looking startled. "Please, help me," I gasped. "There's a man in the woods." He tried to keep me captive. The ranger took me inside and gave me a blanket and some water. "You're safe now," he said. "We'll send a team to investigate." I nodded, my whole body shaking. I was safe, but I knew I would never forget the wild eyes of the man in the cabin. I was camping alone, deep in the forest for a research project. It had been raining for hours, turning the campsite into a swamp. The rain made everything difficult, but I needed the data for my project. My tent was barely holding up against the downpour, and I was inside, trying to keep my equipment dry. I heard footsteps outside my tent. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then I heard a voice. "Hello? Is anyone there?" It was a man's voice, shaky and desperate. I unzipped the tent a bit and peered out. A man was standing there, drenched and shivering. "Please, I need help," he said. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, unsure if I should trust him. But the rain was relentless, and he looked like he was in trouble. I nodded and let him inside. He collapsed onto the ground, breathing heavily. "Thank you," he said. "I've been running for hours." "They're after me." "Who's after you?" I asked, my heart racing. "The police," he replied. "I didn't do anything wrong, but they won't believe me. I need to hide." I didn't know what to do. He seemed scared, but I couldn't be sure if he was telling the truth. "Why are they after you?" I asked. He looked at me with wide eyes. "There was a robbery, and they think I did it. But I swear, I'm innocent." I felt a knot in my stomach. This was more than I had bargained for. "I can't get involved in this," I said. You need to leave. His face changed, becoming hard and cold. I can't leave, he said. And you're going to help me. If you don't, I'll make sure you regret it. Fear gripped me. I realized I was trapped in my own tent with a dangerous man. Okay, I said, trying to stay calm. What do you want me to do? Help me hide, he said. If the police come, you tell them you haven't seen anyone. I nodded, though I wasn't sure how I could help him. The forest was dense, but if the police were searching, they'd find him eventually. We need to move, I said. Staying here isn't safe. We packed up my tent quickly, the rain still pouring down. My hands were shaking, and I struggled to keep my thoughts straight. We headed deeper into the forest, looking for a place to hide. The man kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting the police to appear at any moment. After an hour of trudging through the mud, we found a small cave. It wasn't much, but it offered some shelter from the rain. We huddled inside, trying to stay warm. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "Mark," he replied. "I'm sorry I dragged you into this." I didn't respond. I was too scared to think about anything other than surviving the night. The rain kept falling, and the sound of it pounding against the rocks was deafening. Hours passed, and we barely spoke. I kept listening for any sounds of pursuit, but all I could hear was the rain. My mind was racing with thoughts of escape, but I knew I had to be careful. Mark was unpredictable, and I didn't want to provoke him. Eventually, the rain started to let up. I could see a bit of light filtering through the entrance of the cave. "We should move," I said. "They'll be looking for us." Mark nodded, and we set out again. The forest was eerily quiet after the storm, and every snap of a twig made me jump. I kept hoping we'd stumble upon a ranger or someone who could help, but the forest seemed endless. We walked for hours, and my legs were aching. I was about to suggest we rest when I heard voices in the distance. Mark grabbed my arm and pulled me behind a tree. "Stay quiet," he whispered. I peered out and saw a group of men in uniforms, combing through the forest. They were close, and my heart was pounding. Mark tightened his grip on my arm, and I knew he was ready to run. The men passed by, not seeing us. We stayed hidden until we couldn't hear them anymore. "We need to get out of here," I said. "This isn't safe." Mark nodded, but I could see he was exhausted. "There's a road a few miles from here," he said. "If we can make it there, we can find help." We continued through the forest, every step a struggle. The rain had made the ground slippery, and I was covered in mud. But I kept going, driven by fear and the need to survive. Finally, we reached the road. It was empty, but I felt a surge of hope. "We need to find a car," Mark said. "We can't stay here." We walked along the road, looking for any sign of help. After what felt like an eternity, we saw headlights in the distance. Mark waved his arms, and the car slowed down. It was a ranger's vehicle. The ranger rolled down the window and looked at us, his eyes narrowing. "What's going on here?" he asked. "Please, help us," I said, my voice shaking. "We've been lost in the forest." The ranger nodded, but he kept his eyes on Mark. "Get in," he said. "I'll take you to the station." We climbed into the car, and I felt a wave of relief. We were safe, at least for the moment. The ranger drove us to the station, and I explained what had happened. Mark stayed quiet, his eyes downcast. The police arrived soon after, and they took Mark into custody. I gave my statement, and they assured me I was safe now. The rain started as a drizzle when Graham and I first set up camp on the island. We had planned this trip for months and escaped from everything. The island was isolated, just what we wanted. But by nightfall, the drizzle turned into a downpour, and the wind picked up, howling through the trees. We were huddled in the tent, listening to the rain beat against the fabric. The storm made everything darker, and the island seemed more isolated than ever. I could hear the waves crashing against the shore, louder than usual. The air was thick with moisture and tension. Around midnight, we heard voices outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on us. But the voices grew louder, more distinct. Graham looked at me, his face pale. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, my heart pounding. We stayed quiet, listening. There were definitely people out there. We had chosen this island because it was supposed to be deserted. Who could it be? Graham unzipped the tent slowly, peering out into the rain. I followed, trying to see through the darkness. The voices were coming from the beach. We could make out the faint glow of flashlights. "Stay here," Graham said. "I'll check it out." "No," I whispered back. "We should stick together." We crept out of the tent, the rain soaking us instantly. We moved towards the beach, staying low and trying to stay hidden. As we got closer, we could see a group of men. There were 4 of them, gathered around a fire that sputtered in the rain. They were talking in hushed voices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. One of the men looked up suddenly, his flashlight sweeping across the trees. We ducked down, holding our breath. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, louder than the rain. The flashlight moved on, and the men went back to their conversation. Graham and I retreated back to the tent. "We can't stay here," I said. "We need to leave." "The boat is on the other side of the island," Graham replied. "We can't get to it without them seeing us." We sat in the tent, trying to come up with a plan. The rain was relentless, and the wind made the trees creak and groan. Every sound seemed amplified in the darkness. We knew we had to move before the men discovered us. Suddenly, we heard footsteps approaching. They were getting closer. Graham grabbed my hand, and we crawled out of the tent, moving into the trees. We could see the glow of flashlights moving towards our camp. We moved as quietly as we could, but the wet ground made it difficult. I slipped, falling into the mud. Graham helped me up, and we kept going, trying to put as much distance between us and the men as possible. We heard voices behind us, shouting. They had found our camp. "Split up," one of them yelled. "Find them." Panic set in. We had to keep moving. The rain was coming down harder, making it difficult to see. We stumbled through the trees, trying to stay ahead of the men. We could hear them crashing through the underbrush, getting closer. We came to a cliff overlooking the beach. The waves were violent, crashing against the rocks. There was no way down. We were trapped. Graham looked around desperately. "We need to find another way," he said. We moved along the edge of the cliff, looking for a way down. The ground was slippery, and I almost lost my footing several times. The voices were getting closer, and I could see the flashlights moving through the trees. We found a narrow path leading down the cliff. It was steep and treacherous, but it was our only option. We started down, moving carefully. The rocks were slick with rain, and I had to cling to the side to keep from falling. Halfway down, I heard a shout. One of the men had spotted us. "There they are," he yelled. We moved faster, slipping and sliding down the path. The men were above us, trying to follow. One of them lost his footing and fell, his scream echoing through the night. We didn't look back. We reached the bottom of the cliff and ran along the beach. The rain was coming down in sheets, making it hard to see. We could hear the men shouting behind us, but we kept going. We found a cave in the rocks and ducked inside, hoping the men wouldn't find us. We were soaked and shivering, but we had to stay quiet. The cave was dark, and we couldn't see how deep it went. We heard the men running past, their voices fading into the distance. We stayed hidden, too scared to move. The rain was relentless, pounding against the rocks outside. Hours passed, and the storm started to let up. We decided to make a break for it. We moved cautiously, listening for any sign of the men. The beach was deserted, and we made our way back to our boat. The boat was still there, half submerged in the rising tide. We pushed it into the water and climbed in, paddling away from the island as fast as we could. We didn't look back. As we reached the mainland, the first light of dawn was breaking. We were exhausted and soaked, but we were safe. The men from the island were nowhere to be seen. We made it to shore and collapsed on the beach, grateful to be alive. I had been hiking for hours, the rain falling steadily, soaking through my clothes. I needed to find shelter soon. The forest was dense, and the sound of the rain hitting the leaves was almost deafening. It was getting dark, and I started to worry about where I would sleep. Then I saw the flicker of a campfire through the trees. I walked towards the light, hoping whoever was there would let me dry off by the fire. As I got closer, I saw an older man sitting by the fire, tending to something in a pot. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. "Hey there, stranger," he said. "You look like you could use some warmth. Come on over." I hesitated for a moment, but the cold was getting to me. I nodded and walked over to the fire, grateful for the heat. I sat down on a log opposite him. "Name's Harold," he said, extending a hand. "Been out here fishing for a few days." "John," I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm. "Got caught in the rain and needed a place to dry off." "You're welcome to stay," Harold said. "Got plenty of room." He ladled some soup from the pot and handed me a bowl. I accepted it gratefully, the warmth spreading through my cold hands. We chatted for a while. Harold seemed friendly enough. He told me about the fish he'd caught and the different spots he liked to camp at. He seemed like a seasoned outdoorsman. I felt a bit more at ease, thinking maybe I had found a safe place to spend the night. As the night wore on, the rain continued to fall and the fire crackled. Harold's stories started to take a darker turn. He talked about a time when he got into a fight with another fisherman. He described how he had beaten the man badly, leaving him for dead. His eyes had a strange glint as he told the story. I started to feel uneasy, but I didn't want to show it. I just nodded along, hoping he wouldn't notice my discomfort. He noticed. "You look nervous, John," he said, a slight smile on his lips. "Something bothering you?" No, just tired," I said quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. Harold's smile widened. "You know, the woods can be a dangerous place," he said. "You never know who you might run into." I nodded again, my mind racing. I needed to find a way out of this situation. I glanced around, looking for a possible escape route. The rain was still pouring, making the forest dark and treacherous. "I think I'll turn in for the night," I said, standing up. "Thanks for the soup." Harold's eyes followed me as I moved. "Suit yourself," he said. "Just be careful out there." I walked away from the fire, trying to stay calm. I found a spot a little ways away and sat down, pretending to settle in for the night. But I kept my eyes on Harold, watching his every move. He stayed by the fire for a while, then stood up and walked over to his tent. I waited until I was sure he was inside, then slowly got up and started to move away. I tried to be as quiet as possible, but the rain made it difficult to hear anything else. I had to get back to the trail and find a way out of the woods. Suddenly, I heard a twig snap behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding. Harold was standing there, a menacing look on his face. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, his voice cold. I just needed to stretch my legs," I stammered. Harold took a step closer, and I could see a glint of something metal in his hand. "You weren't thinking of leaving, were you?" he asked. I took a step back, my mind racing. I needed to think fast. "No, just needed some air," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Harold laughed, a low, sinister sound. "I don't believe you," he said. "You see, I've had a lot of people try to leave me. It never ends well for them." I bolted. I ran as fast as I could, the rain blinding me, the branches whipping at my face. I could hear Harold behind me, his footsteps getting closer. I pushed myself harder, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I stumbled and fell, my knee slamming into a rock. Pain shot through my leg, but I forced myself to get up. I could hear Harold getting closer. I had to keep moving. I saw a faint light through the trees and headed towards it. I burst into a small clearing and saw a cabin with a light on inside. I pounded on the door, shouting for help. The door opened, and a man stood there, looking startled. "Please, help me," I gasped. "There's a man chasing me." He pulled me inside and locked the door. "What's going on?" he asked, looking out the window. "There's a man out there," I said, trying to catch my breath. "He's dangerous." The man grabbed a shotgun from the corner and nodded. "Stay here," he said. "I'll take care of it." I heard footsteps outside and held my breath. The man with the shotgun opened the door and stepped outside. There was a tense silence, then a shout, and a gunshot rang out. I waited, my heart pounding. The door opened, and the man stepped back inside. "It's over," he said, his face grim. "You're safe now." I collapsed onto a chair, the adrenaline leaving my body. I was safe. The nightmare was over. The rain started to pour down hard around midnight. My tent was holding up well, but I couldn't say the same for everything outside. The sound of the rain hitting the fabric was almost deafening, and the fire I had made earlier was now just a memory. I sat inside, reading a book by the light of a small lantern, when I heard a voice calling out from the darkness. "Hello? Is anyone there?" The voice sounded desperate, and I hesitated for a moment. "Yeah, I'm here," I called back. "Who is it?" A man stumbled into the light of my lantern. He was drenched, shivering, and looked like he had been through hell. "My tent got washed away," he said, his voice trembling. "Can I stay here for the night?" I couldn't just turn him away in this weather, so I nodded. "Sure, come in and get warm." He sat down heavily, wrapping a blanket I offered him around his shoulders. "Thank you." "My name's Paul," he said, his teeth chattering. "Ellie," I replied. "Are you okay? Do you need anything else?" "No, just, thank you," he said, staring into the dim light of the lantern. We sat in silence for a while. I tried to go back to my book, but I couldn't focus. Something about Paul made me uneasy. His eyes were wild, darting around the tent, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. I told myself it was just the cold and the rain, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After a while, Paul started talking. He told me about how he had been camping nearby when the storm hit, and his tent got swept away by a sudden flood. He had been wandering in the rain for hours before he found my campsite. But his story kept changing. First, he said he had been camping with friends, then he said he was alone. He mentioned he had lost his backpack in the flood, but then said he had left it behind at his camp. I started to feel more and more uneasy. "Are you sure you're okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Paul looked at me, his eyes wide and unfocused. "Yeah, just tired," he muttered. I nodded, not knowing what else to say. I decided to stay awake and keep an eye on him. Something about him just didn't sit right with me. The rain kept pouring down, and the night dragged on. Paul seemed to doze off, but I couldn't relax. Every time he moved, I tensed up, expecting something bad to happen. Around 3 a.m., I heard a noise outside the tent. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced at Paul, but he was still lying down, his eyes closed. I slowly unzipped the tent and peeked outside, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness and the rain. I turned back, and Paul was sitting up, staring at me. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice flat and cold. "Just checking the noise," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He didn't respond, just kept staring at me. I sat back down, my mind racing. I needed to stay calm and think of a way to get through the night safely. Minutes felt like hours. I kept my eyes on Paul, who seemed to be drifting in and out of sleep. I couldn't afford to fall asleep. Not with him here. Suddenly, Paul sat up again, more alert this time. "I think I heard something outside," he said, his voice low. I nodded, my heart pounding. "Yeah, I heard it too." "I should go check it out," he said, reaching for the zipper of the tent. "No," I said quickly. "Let's just stay inside. It's safer." He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "Why? What are you hiding?" "I'm not hiding anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's just not safe to go out in this weather." Paul stared at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay. You're right." We sat in silence again, the tension thick in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. Then, out of nowhere, Paul lunged at me. I scrambled back, trying to get away, but he was fast. He grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice. "What are you doing?" I shouted, trying to pull away. "I can't let you leave," he said, his voice shaking. "You know too much." "I don't know anything," I yelled, struggling to free myself. He tightened his grip, his eyes wild. "I can't take that chance." Desperation gave me strength. I twisted my body, kicking out with my legs, and managed to knock him off balance. He let go of my arm, and I scrambled to the other side of the tent, grabbing the lantern. "Stay back," I warned, holding the lantern up like a weapon. Paul got to his feet, his face twisted with rage. "You can't stop me," he snarled, moving towards me. I swung the lantern at him, hitting him in the shoulder. He stumbled back, and I took the chance to dive out of the tent into the pouring rain. I ran, not caring about the mud and the cold. I just had to get away. I heard Paul shouting behind me, but I didn't look back. I kept running, my breath coming in ragged gasps, until I saw the lights of another campsite. I stumbled into the camp, shouting for help. A group of campers came running, and I told them what happened. They called the police, and we waited together until they arrived. Paul was gone by the time the police reached my campsite. They searched the area but couldn't find him. They told me I was lucky to be alive. I knew they were right. I never went camping alone again after that. I was out camping in the woods during a heavy storm. The rain was coming down hard, and the wind was making the trees sway. I had my tent set up and a small fire going, trying to keep warm and dry. The sound of the rain was so loud, it was hard to hear anything else. I was just settling in for the night when I heard a noise outside. I unzipped my tent and peeked out. I saw a man standing near the edge of my campsite. He was drenched, holding a rifle, and looking around nervously. He noticed me and walked over quickly. My heart started racing. "Hey," he said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I need help. My tent got washed away, and I'm lost. Can I stay here for a bit?" I was hesitant. Something about him seemed off. But the rain was pouring, and he looked desperate. I nodded, and he came closer to the fire, trying to warm up. "Thanks," he said. "Name's Mike. What's yours?" "Eric," I replied, keeping my eyes on him. We sat there in silence for a while. The rain kept coming down, and the fire was our only source of light. I noticed Mike kept looking around, as if he was expecting someone to show up. It made me uneasy. "You out here alone?" he asked suddenly. "Yeah," I said. "Just needed some time away from everything." He nodded but didn't say anything else. I could see the rifle was old but well maintained. I wondered why he was carrying it out in this storm. After a while, Mike stood up and walked around the campsite, looking into the darkness. "You hear that?" he asked. I shook my head, straining to hear over the rain. "No, what is it?" He came back to the fire, his face tense. "I think there's someone else out there. I've been hearing noises all night." I didn't hear anything, but his paranoia was starting to get to me. I tried to brush it off. "It's probably just the wind and the rain," I said. He didn't seem convinced. He kept pacing around, looking out into the trees. I tried to ignore him and focus on keeping the fire going, but it was hard. Then, I saw it. A faint light flickering in the distance. It wasn't lightning, it was too steady. It looked like a flashlight. "Do you see that?" I asked, pointing. Mike turned and saw the light. His face went pale. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice shaking. "Now." "Why?" I asked, my heart pounding. "That's not just anyone out there," he said. "It's a poacher. He's been hunting protected animals in this area. I caught him earlier tonight, and he threatened me. That's why I had to leave my camp." My blood ran cold. I grabbed my things quickly, trying to pack up as fast as I could. Mike was already moving, his rifle ready. "We need to stay together," he said. "And be quiet. If he finds us, we're dead." We started moving through the woods, the rain making it hard to see or hear anything. The light kept moving closer, and I could feel my heart beating in my throat. We stumbled through the trees, trying to stay ahead of the poacher. Mike led the way, his rifle ready. I followed close behind, trying to keep up. The light kept getting closer, and I could hear footsteps now. The poacher was moving fast, and he was getting closer. Mike stopped suddenly and motioned for me to be quiet. We crouched down behind a large tree, trying to stay hidden. The light came closer, and I could see the outline of a man holding a flashlight and a rifle. He was looking around, searching for us. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure he could hear it. We stayed as still as possible, hoping he would pass by. He stopped right in front of our hiding spot, shining his light around. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't see us. After what felt like an eternity, he moved on, continuing through the woods. We waited until the light was far away before moving again. "We need to find a place to hide until morning," Mike whispered. "He won't give up easily." We kept moving, trying to find a safe spot. The rain was relentless, and we were both soaked to the bone. Finally, we found a small cave. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. We crawled inside and tried to make ourselves as small as possible. "We'll stay here until the rain stops," Mike said. "Then we'll head to the ranger station and report him." I nodded, trying to stay calm. We sat in the dark, listening to the rain and the occasional distant footsteps. The night seemed to drag on forever. Every time I heard a noise, my heart would race. I kept thinking about the poacher out there, looking for us. Finally, the rain started to let up. The sky was getting lighter, and I knew morning was coming. "We should move now," Mike said, "before he finds us." We crawled out of the cave and started making our way through the woods again. The rain had turned the ground to mud, making it hard to walk. We moved as quickly and quietly as we could, heading towards the ranger station. I could feel my anxiety growing with every step. Then, we heard it. The sound of footsteps behind us, moving fast. The poacher had found us. "Run!" Mike shouted, pushing me ahead. We ran as fast as we could, the mud slowing us down. I could hear the poacher getting closer, his footsteps pounding behind us. We burst out of the trees and saw the ranger station ahead. Relief flooded through me, but we weren't safe yet. Mike fired his rifle, and I heard a shout behind us. The poacher had been hit, but he kept coming. We reached the ranger station and banged on the door, shouting for help. The door flew open, and a ranger pulled us inside. "What's going on?" he asked. "There's a poacher out there," Mike said, gasping for breath. "He's trying to kill us." The ranger grabbed his radio and called for backup. "Stay here," he said. "We'll handle this." We waited inside, our hearts pounding. We heard more gunshots outside, then silence. After a few minutes, the ranger came back in. "It's over," he said. "We've got him." I collapsed into a chair, relief washing over me. We were safe. The nightmare was finally over. The rain started just after we set up camp. We were deep in the woods, far from anyone else. The sound of the rain on the tent was almost calming. Almost. We had planned this trip for months. A chance to disconnect, to get away from the city and its noise. But now, in the rain, everything felt different. The fire was hard to keep going, but we managed. Jenny and I sat close to it, trying to stay warm and dry. We laughed about the rain, joked about how nothing ever goes as planned. Then, we heard it. Voices. Faint at first, then louder. Men, and they didn't sound friendly. I motioned to Jenny to stay quiet. We listened, trying to make out what they were saying. The words were hard to hear over the rain, but I caught bits and pieces. Something about a deal, and making sure no one sees. My heart started to race. "Do you think they saw us?" Jenny whispered. I shook my head, but I wasn't sure. I didn't want to take any chances. "We need to stay quiet," I said. and keep the fire low. We sat there, tense, listening. The voices grew closer, then faded again. I couldn't tell how many there were. 3, maybe 4. They sounded angry, arguing about something. We stayed as still as possible, hoping they would move on. Suddenly, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness. It swept over the trees, then our tent. I grabbed Jenny's hand, and we ducked down, holding our breath. The light lingered for a moment, then moved on. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. The voices moved away, but I knew they weren't gone. "We need to get out of here," I whispered. "Now!" We packed quickly, trying to be as quiet as possible. Every sound seemed louder in the rain. We grabbed our backpacks and doused the fire, making sure it was out. Then we started moving, staying low and trying to avoid the flashlight beams. The rain made everything slippery. We stumbled through the mud, trying to keep our footing. The voices were getting louder again. They were close. Too close. I could see the beams of their flashlights cutting through the trees, searching. We hid behind a large rock, trying to catch our breath. I could hear the men talking. They were arguing again, but I couldn't make out the words. Then one of them shouted, and I heard a gunshot. Jenny stifled a scream, and I pulled her close, trying to keep her calm. "We have to keep moving," I whispered. "Stay low and follow me." We crept through the woods, trying to stay out of sight. The rain was relentless, making it hard to see or hear anything. Every step felt like it could give us away. My mind was racing, trying to think of a way out. Then, we saw it. A cabin hidden among the trees. It looked abandoned, but it might be our only chance. We made our way to it, keeping low and moving as quickly as we could. The door was unlocked, and we slipped inside, closing it quietly behind us. The cabin was dark and musty. It didn't look like anyone had been there in a long time. We found a corner and huddled together, trying to stay warm and quiet. The rain pounded on the roof, masking our breathing. We heard the men outside, their voices angry and loud. They were close, but they didn't seem to know we were in the cabin. I held Jenny close, trying to think of what to do next. We couldn't stay here forever. Hours passed, but it felt like days. The men kept searching, their flashlights sweeping through the trees. We stayed as still as possible, hoping they would give up and leave. But they didn't. They were determined to find something or someone. Finally, the voices started to fade. The men were moving away, but I knew it might only be temporary. We had to get out of the woods, but we couldn't risk being seen. We waited, making sure they were really gone. When we couldn't hear them anymore, we crept out of the cabin. The rain had let up a bit, but it was still dark and muddy. We moved as quickly and quietly as we could, staying off the main paths and sticking to the underbrush. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like one of the men. But we kept moving, driven by fear and adrenaline. We had to get to safety to find help. Finally, we saw the lights of a ranger station in the distance. Relief washed over me, but I knew we weren't safe yet. We made our way to the station, trying to stay out of sight. When we reached it, we banged on the door, shouting for help. A ranger opened the door, and we stumbled inside, soaked and shaking. "There's men in the woods," I said, trying to catch my breath. "They have guns. They're looking for us." The ranger grabbed his radio and called for backup. "Stay here," he said. "We'll take care of it." We waited inside, our hearts still pounding. I could hear the rangers talking, their voices calm and professional. After what felt like an eternity, they came back. "It's over," the ranger said. "We found them." You're safe now. The rain was pouring down when I found him. I had just finished my shift at the diner and was driving home on that deserted stretch of road through the woods. It was pitch black except for my headlights cutting through the rain. That's when I saw him, stumbling along the roadside, drenched and limping. I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Are you all right?" I shouted over the sound of the rain. He looked up, his face pale and contorted in pain. "Please, help me," he gasped. "I've been attacked." I got out and helped him into the car. He was shivering and soaked to the bone. "What happened?" I asked as I cranked up the heater. "Some friends and I were camping," he said, wincing as he spoke. "They turned on me. I don't know why." His clothes were torn, and there was blood on his shirt. I reached for my phone to call for help, but he grabbed my arm. "No police," he said urgently. "They might be watching." That set off alarm bells in my head. Why wouldn't he want the police involved? But I nodded and started driving. "Where to?" I asked. "Anywhere away from here," he said. "Please." I drove for a while, the rain pounding on the roof of the car. I glanced at him occasionally. Something about his story didn't sit right with me. He was too alert, too calculated for someone who had just been attacked. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep him talking. "Jason," he replied. "Thank you for stopping." I didn't think anyone would. "Where exactly were you camping?" I pressed. "By the old quarry," he said. "Do you know it?" I did. It was a known hangout spot for teenagers, but I hadn't heard of any incidents there recently. "What happened with your friends?" I asked. He looked out the window, avoiding my gaze. "We had a disagreement. Things got out of hand." It was vague, and he wasn't giving me any real answers. "Should we go to a hospital?" "You look like you need a doctor." "No," he said quickly. "Just get me to a motel or something. I just need to lay low for a bit." His insistence on avoiding any official help was troubling. I was beginning to wonder if I had made a mistake picking him up. We drove in silence for a while longer, the tension in the car growing thicker with each passing mile. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you live around here?" "Not far," I said, my guard up now. "Why?" He didn't answer, just nodded and stared ahead. I saw a sign for a motel up ahead and decided it was the best place to drop him off. "We'll stop here," I said, pulling into the parking lot. He seemed relieved and got out of the car. "Thank you," he said, leaning back in. "I really appreciate this." "Take care," I replied, watching him limp towards the motel office. I didn't drive away immediately. Something about his story just didn't add up, and I had a bad feeling about leaving him there. I decided to wait until he was inside before leaving. He talked to the clerk, got a key, and headed to his room. I noted the room number and finally drove off, but not far. I parked a little way down the road, where I could still see the motel. I don't know what I was expecting to see, but a few minutes later, another car pulled into the lot. 2 men got out and went into the office. My heart raced. Had Jason's friends tracked him down? They came out, and I could see them talking to the clerk, probably asking about Jason. I knew I had to do something. I grabbed my phone and called 911, explaining the situation as best I could. "Stay where you are," the dispatcher said. "We'll send someone right away." The men headed towards Jason's room. I could see them knocking, then forcing their way in when he opened the door. I heard shouting and then a struggle. I wanted to help, but I knew I couldn't take on 2 men by myself. The police arrived within minutes, their lights flashing in the darkness. The men tried to run, but they didn't get far. The officers caught them and brought them out in handcuffs. Jason was brought out too, looking shaken but unarmed. I got out of the car and approached one of the officers. "I was the one who called," I said. "Is he all right?" The officer nodded. "He'll be fine. Thanks for calling us." These men were wanted for a series of assaults and robberies in the area. You did the right thing. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Jason came over and thanked me again. "You saved my life," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm glad you're safe," I replied, still trying to process everything that had happened. As I drove home, the rain finally began to let up. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to leaving Jason alone at that motel. If I hadn't stayed to watch, who knows what would have happened. It was a night I would never forget, a reminder that sometimes gut feelings are there for a reason. We had just set up camp near the dam, hoping for a peaceful weekend. The rain had started lightly at first, but it quickly turned into a downpour. The sound of the rain hitting the tent was almost soothing. We were sitting around our campfire, trying to stay dry under a tarp, when the siren went off. At first, we thought it was just a warning, but then it grew louder, more urgent. I could feel my stomach drop. My friend Mark looked at me with wide eyes. "That's the damn siren," he said, his voice trembling. "It means there's a problem." We scrambled to grab our gear, but the rain made everything slippery and difficult to handle. We could hear other campers shouting and running, the panic spreading like wildfire. We knew we had to move fast. The water started rising quickly. It was already pooling around our feet, and we hadn't even reached the path that led back to the parking area. The ground was turning into mud, making every step a struggle. We heard more shouting, this time closer. A group of people ran past us, their faces twisted in fear. One of them shouted something about the dam breaking. My heart was pounding in my chest. We needed to get to higher ground, but the only way was through the dense forest. Mark and I pushed through the underbrush, the rain making it hard to see and even harder to move. We could hear the water roaring behind us, getting closer with every second. The thought of being swept away kept us going. Then we heard another sound of voices, angry and desperate. We stumbled into a clearing and saw a group of people. They were arguing, their voices raised. One of them saw us and shouted, "Hey, they have gear." Before we could react, they rushed at us. We tried to back away, but the mud made it impossible. They grabbed our backpacks, ripping them off our shoulders. One of them shoved Mark to the ground. "Give us everything you have," he demanded. I tried to help Mark up, but another man grabbed me by the collar and threw me down. They were frantic, their eyes wild with fear and desperation. I realized they were looters, taking advantage of the chaos. We couldn't fight back. There were too many of them, and they were stronger. They took everything, our food, our water, even our jackets. Then they ran off, leaving us in the pouring rain with nothing. Mark and I struggled to our feet. We were soaked and shivering, but we couldn't stay there. The water was still rising. We had to keep moving. The forest was dense and dark, the rain making it almost impossible to see. We stumbled over roots and rocks, our bodies aching from the effort. Every step was a battle. The rain kept coming, the water rising faster than we could move. We heard more people in the distance, their screams blending with the roar of the water. We didn't know if they were running from the flood or from the looters. We finally reached a hill. It was steep and slippery, but it was our only chance. We climbed, our hands and feet sinking into the mud. I could feel my muscles burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Mark was right behind me, his face set in determination. We reached the top just as the water surged below us. It was like a wall of liquid, crashing through the trees and taking everything in its path. We collapsed on the ground, too exhausted to move. For a moment, we just lay there, catching our breath. The rain had eased up a little, but it was still coming down hard. We could see the water below, churning and rising. We were safe for now, but we didn't know for how long. We needed to find shelter, something to keep us dry and warm. We had lost everything to the looters, and now we were exposed to the elements. We got up and started walking, our bodies aching and our minds numb from the shock. We found a small cave, just big enough for the two of us. It was damp and cold, but it was better than nothing. We huddled together, trying to stay warm. The sound of the water was still loud, but at least we were out of its reach. We sat there in silence, our minds racing. We had survived the initial flood, but we didn't know what would happen next. The rain was still falling, the water still rising. We had no idea if the dam had completely failed or if there was more to come. We knew we couldn't stay in the cave forever. We needed to find help, to let someone know what had happened. But for now, we were safe. We had each other, and that was enough to keep us going. As the hours passed, the rain began to ease. The roar of the water faded to a distant rumble. We knew we had to move again, to find higher ground and hopefully some help. We were tired and scared, but we were alive. We climbed out of the cave and started walking. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sound the dripping of water from the trees. We didn't see anyone else, and we didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. Eventually, we reached a road. It was deserted, but it was a sign of civilization. We followed it, hoping it would lead us to safety. We were cold, wet, and hungry, but we kept moving. Finally, we saw lights in the distance. It was a rescue team, looking for survivors. They saw us and rushed over, wrapping us in blankets and giving us water. We told them what had happened, and they nodded grimly. We were taken to a shelter, where we could finally rest and get warm. We were safe, but the memory of that night would haunt us forever. We had faced the fury of nature and the cruelty of desperate people, and we had survived. The rain was coming down hard. Karen and I were soaked to the bone. We had been hiking when the storm hit, and we needed to find shelter fast. That's when we saw the cabin. It looked old and abandoned, but we didn't have a choice. We ran up to the door and knocked, hoping someone would let us in. When no one answered, we pushed the door open. The place looked empty, dusty furniture covered in cobwebs. We stepped inside, shaking off the rain. "Hello?" I called out, just in case. No answer. We decided to stay until the storm passed. Karen found some old blankets and wrapped Timmy up to keep him warm. I went to check the other rooms, making sure we were alone. I found a small bedroom at the back. The bed was unmade, and there were toys scattered on the floor. It looked like someone had left in a hurry. I was about to go back to Karen when I heard a noise behind me. I turned around and saw a woman standing in the doorway. She looked scared and angry. Her clothes were dirty, and she had dark circles under her eyes. She was holding a small child, a boy about Timmy's age. Who are you? She demanded. What are you doing here? I put my hands up, trying to show I meant no harm. We're just looking for shelter, I said. The storm caught us by surprise. We didn't know anyone was here. She looked at me for a moment, then at Taryn and Timmy. You need to leave, she said, her voice trembling. This is our home now. You can't stay. Taryn came over, holding Timmy close. Please, she said. We just need to wait out the storm. We'll leave as soon as it stops. The woman shook her head. You don't understand, she said. It's not safe here. You need to go. Before we could say anything else, there was a loud crash from outside. The woman's eyes widened in fear. She grabbed her child and ran to the window. They're coming, she whispered. Who's coming? I asked, but she didn't answer. She turned to us, her expression desperate. You need to hide, she said. Now. We didn't argue. We ran to the other room and hid behind the old sofa. Taryn held Timmy close, trying to keep him quiet. We could hear footsteps outside, then the sound of the door creaking open. A man's voice called out. Megan? Are you here? The woman didn't answer. The footsteps got closer. I know you're here, Megan. You can't hide forever. I peeked out from behind the sofa and saw a man standing in the doorway. He was tall and muscular, with a look of anger on his face. He started searching the room, throwing furniture aside. Megan, the woman, stepped out from her hiding place. Leave us alone, she said, her voice shaking. We don't have anything you want. The man laughed. You think you can keep hiding from me, he said. You're mine, Megan. You and the boy. Taryn gasped, and the man turned towards us. Who's there? He demanded. We stayed silent, hoping he wouldn't find us. But it was too late. He saw us and started towards us, his eyes filled with rage. Megan ran at him, trying to stop him. Leave them alone, she screamed. He pushed her aside and grabbed me by the collar. You shouldn't have come here, he growled. I struggled to get free, but he was too strong. Taryn screamed, holding Timmy tight. Megan got up and grabbed a lamp, smashing it over the man's head. He stumbled back, letting go of me. Run! Megan shouted. We didn't need to be told twice. We grabbed Timmy and ran out the door, into the pouring rain. The man was right behind us, but Megan blocked his way, giving us time to escape. We ran through the forest, not looking back. The rain made it hard to see, and we stumbled over roots and rocks. We could hear the man shouting behind us, but his voice grew fainter as we ran. We finally reached a road and saw a car coming towards us. We waved it down, and the driver stopped. Please help us, Taryn said. There's a man back there. He's trying to kill us. The driver let us in and sped off. We looked back and saw the cabin disappearing into the distance. We were safe, but we couldn't forget the look of desperation on Megan's face. We never found out what happened to her or her child. We reported the incident to the police, but they didn't find anything. The cabin was empty when they arrived, and there was no sign of the man. I went camping to get away from everything. The rain started not long after I set up my tent. It was heavy and cold, but I didn't mind. I just wanted peace. My family had been fighting a lot, and I needed a break. I was sitting under the tarp I had set up, listening to the rain when I saw her. She stumbled into my campsite, soaked and shivering. She looked terrified. "Please, help me," she said. I got up and helped her sit down under the tarp. "What happened?" I asked. She was shaking so much she could barely speak. "He's coming. He's after me," she said. "I need to hide." I didn't know who she was talking about, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I gave her my jacket and some water. "Just stay here," I said. "I'll keep watch." She nodded and tried to calm down. I went to the edge of the campsite and looked around. I couldn't see anyone, but the rain made it hard to see anything. After a while, I heard footsteps. Someone was coming. I turned off my flashlight and crouched down behind a tree. A man appeared, moving quickly through the rain. He was tall and had a mean look on his face. He was looking for someone, and I knew it was her. I stayed as still as I could, hoping he wouldn't see me. He walked right past me, towards the tent. I knew I had to do something. I picked up a rock and threw it into the bushes. It made a loud noise, and the man turned towards it. He walked over to where the noise came from, and I took my chance. I ran back to the girl and grabbed her hand. "We have to go, now," I whispered. She nodded, and we ran into the forest. The rain was pouring down, making it hard to see and hear anything. We ran for what felt like forever, but the man didn't follow us. We found a small cave and hid inside. "Who is he?" I asked. "Why is he after you?" She took a deep breath and told me her story. Her name was Emily. She had been living with her uncle after her parents died. Her uncle was a bad man, always angry and violent. She found out he was doing something illegal and tried to run away. That's when he started chasing her. "We need to go to the police," I said. She shook her head. "He has friends in the police. They won't help us." I didn't know what to do. We couldn't stay in the cave forever, but it wasn't safe to go back to the campsite. We waited until the rain slowed down a bit. Then we left the cave and started walking through the forest. I tried to keep us moving in the right direction, but it was hard to tell where we were going. We were both tired and scared. We heard a noise behind us. It was him. He had found us. We started running again, but he was faster. He caught up to us and grabbed Emily. She screamed, and I tried to help, but he pushed me away. He had a knife. He held it to her throat and told me to stay back. I could see the fear in her eyes. I had to do something. I picked up a stick and hit him as hard as I could. He dropped the knife and let go of Emily. We ran again, but he wasn't far behind. I could hear him shouting, getting closer. We reached a road and saw a car coming. I waved it down, and the driver stopped. "Please help us," I said. "He's trying to kill us." The driver let us in, and we sped off. We looked back and saw the man standing in the road, getting smaller and smaller as we drove away. We went to the nearest town and found a police station. This time, they believed us. They arrested Emily's uncle and his friends. Emily was safe, and I went back home. We were driving back from a weekend trip when the rain started. It was heavy, making it hard to see the road. Sarah suggested we take a shortcut through some back roads to save time. I agreed, even though I wasn't familiar with the area. As we turned onto the narrow, muddy road, the rain seemed to get worse. The windshield wipers couldn't keep up, and the car's headlights barely cut through the downpour. We drove slowly, trying to stay on the road. After a while, we saw a sign that said private property. I hesitated, but Sarah insisted we keep going, thinking it would lead us back to the main road faster. The road turned into a dirt path, and soon we were surrounded by thick forest. The path was full of deep puddles and ruts. The car's tires struggled for traction. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to avoid getting stuck. We were far from any signs of civilization. Suddenly, the car lurched to a stop. We had hit a particularly deep rut. I tried to reverse, but the tires just spun in the mud. We were stuck. I told Sarah we had to get out and push. She wasn't happy about it, but we had no choice. We got out into the rain, which was cold and relentless. We were soaked in seconds. We pushed and pushed, but the car wouldn't budge. I looked around, hoping to see some sign of help, but there was nothing. Just trees and darkness. Then we saw a light in the distance. It looked like a house. We decided to walk towards it, hoping someone there could help us. We left the car and started through the mud. As we got closer, we saw it was a small, run-down farmhouse. The light was coming from a single window. We knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I called out, but still nothing. We were about to leave when the door creaked open. A man stood there, staring at us. He was tall and had a scruffy beard. His clothes were dirty, and he looked like he hadn't seen another person in years. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was harsh. "Our car is stuck," I said. "Can you help us?" He looked us up and down, then nodded. "Wait here," he said, and closed the door. We stood there, shivering in the rain, waiting. A few minutes later, the man came back with another person, a younger man who looked just as rough. They had a rope and some tools. "Follow us," the older man said. We followed them back to the car. They tied the rope to the bumper and the younger man drove a rusty old truck they had brought. It took a lot of effort, but they managed to pull our car out of the rut. We thanked them, but they didn't seem interested in conversation. They just told us to leave and stay off their property. We got back in the car and started driving, but the rain was still heavy, and the road was even worse. We drove for what felt like hours, but we couldn't find our way back to the main road. Then we saw another light, this time a campfire. We stopped the car and walked towards it, hoping to find more help. As we got closer, we saw a group of people sitting around the fire. They looked rough, like the men who had helped us earlier. One of them stood up as we approached. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. His tone was menacing. "We're lost," I said. "We just want to find the main road." The man stared at us for a moment, then nodded. "Follow me," he said. He led us through the woods, away from the campfire. We walked in silence, the rain still pouring down. After a while, I realized we were walking in circles. The man was leading us deeper into the forest. I stopped. "Where are you taking us?" I asked. The man turned and grinned. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. I grabbed Sarah's hand and we started running. The man shouted, and we heard footsteps behind us. We ran through the forest, trying to find our way back to the car. The rain made it hard to see, and we kept slipping in the mud. Finally, we saw the car. We jumped in and locked the doors. I started the engine and drove as fast as I could, not caring about the ruts and puddles. We drove for hours, not stopping until we finally saw the lights of a town. We were safe. We never talked about that night again. But I'll never forget the look in that man's eyes, or the feeling of being hunted in the rain. The rain was relentless. I had been hiking for hours, and the weather showed no sign of letting up. My clothes were soaked, and my boots squelched with every step. I needed to find somewhere to wait out the storm. I spotted a cave up ahead and decided to take my chances. It was better than being exposed to the rain. As I entered the cave, I saw it was dry and a bit warmer than outside. I set my backpack down and sat against the wall, trying to warm up. I was grateful for the shelter, even if it was a little damp inside. I took out my phone to check the weather and see how long the storm might last. That's when I heard voices. They were faint, but they were coming from deeper inside the cave. I froze, my heart racing. I tried to stay as quiet as possible. The voices were getting louder. It sounded like more than one person, and they were speaking in low, urgent tones. I crept closer to the source of the voices, careful not to make a sound. The cave was twisting and turning, and I had to move slowly to avoid tripping over the uneven ground. The voices were clearer now, and I could make out some words, but I still couldn't understand much. I finally reached a point where I could see into a larger chamber of the cave. What I saw made my blood run cold. There were several people inside, all dressed in dark clothes. They were sitting around a large table with various items spread out on it. I saw bags of white powder, scales, and other equipment I recognized from TV shows about drug trafficking. Panic surged through me. I was in the middle of a drug operation. I had to get out of there, but I couldn't just turn around and walk back. The entrance was visible from where they were sitting. If they saw me, there would be no escaping. I looked around for another way out. The cave had multiple passages, so I picked one that seemed to go further back. I moved quickly but carefully, trying to stay as silent as possible. The sound of the rain outside was my only cover, but I couldn't rely on it forever. As I moved through the passage, I could hear the voices growing louder again. I stopped and pressed myself against the wall. I peered around the corner and saw a small opening that led outside. It was partially hidden by some rocks and shrubs. I inched closer, my heart pounding in my chest. I made sure no one was watching and squeezed through the opening. I was outside, but I wasn't safe yet. I needed to get as far away from that cave as possible. The rain was still pouring down, but it felt like a blessing compared to the danger I had just escaped. I ran through the forest, trying to put as much distance between myself and the cave as I could. I kept looking over my shoulder, fearing that someone might come after me. The forest was dark and muddy. I had to be careful not to slip or fall. The storm had turned the ground into a slippery mess. I stumbled a few times but managed to keep going. After what felt like hours, I finally reached a road. I was exhausted and covered in mud, but I was relieved to see the headlights of a car approaching. I waved my arms frantically, and the car pulled over. The driver was a kind elderly woman who offered to give me a ride. I explained that I was lost and in trouble, and she took me to the nearest town. I was shaken but safe. The police were called, and I gave them a brief description of what I had seen in the cave. They assured me they would look into it, but I never found out what happened. I had been driving for hours in the rain, the downpour relentless and the road barely visible through the sheets of water. I had taken a detour to avoid a flooded highway, but now I found myself on a narrow, winding road deep in the woods. My phone had lost signal, and I was running low on gas. The storm was showing no signs of letting up, and the windshield wipers were struggling to keep up. Eventually, I spotted a small, dimly lit cabin nestled off the road. I was desperate for a break from the driving and decided to pull over and see if I could use a phone or at least find some shelter. As I approached the cabin, I saw that the door was slightly ajar. My instincts told me to be cautious, but the prospect of warmth and a dry place to wait out the storm was too tempting. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I pushed it open slowly and stepped inside. The place was rustic and smelled musty, but it looked empty. I called out, but again, no response. I was about to turn back when I heard a noise coming from the back room. It sounded like footsteps. I crept towards the sound, trying to stay as quiet as possible. When I peeked around the corner, I saw a group of men in the back room, huddled around a table. They were wearing dark clothing, and their expressions were serious. What caught my eye was the way they were handling various weapons, guns and knives, laying out on the table. My heart began to race. I realized these men were up to something dangerous. They were clearly trying to avoid being seen by someone. I didn't know who they were hiding from, but it was obvious they were armed and likely dangerous. I needed to get out of there, but I had to be careful not to alert them to my presence. I took a step back, trying to stay silent, but the old wooden floor creaked under my weight. One of the men turned his head towards the sound, and I froze. My heart was pounding in my chest. I waited, holding my breath, as he scanned the room. For a moment, I thought I had been discovered, but then he turned back to the table. I knew I had to leave, and I needed to be quick. I slipped out of the back room and moved towards the front door. Just as I was about to open it, I heard one of the men say, "Someone's out there." I heard something. Panic surged through me. I turned and saw one of the men moving towards the front of the cabin. I had no choice but to hide. I ran to a small closet in the corner and squeezed inside, trying to control my breathing. My heart felt like it was about to burst through my chest. The rain continued to hammer down outside, masking any sounds I made. The man approached the closet and opened the door. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't find me. He seemed to sense something was off, but he didn't see me. He shut the door and went back to the others. I waited in the closet, every second feeling like an eternity. My clothes were soaked, and the cold was seeping through to my bones. I could hear the men talking, their voices now urgent and heated. It was clear they were searching for me. I had to think quickly. I knew staying hidden would only delay the inevitable. I decided to make a run for it. I waited until the voices grew fainter, then quietly opened the closet door and slipped out. I moved towards the front door, trying to avoid making any noise. When I finally reached the door, I peeked outside. The storm had not let up, and the rain was still pouring down heavily. I could see the headlights of their vehicles parked nearby. I needed to avoid those at all costs. I quickly made my way back to my car, hoping the men wouldn't see me. I got into my car and started it up. The engine roared to life, and I hoped the sound of the rain would cover the noise. I drove carefully away from the cabin, trying to stay as far from the men as possible. My hands were shaking, and my mind was racing. I didn't stop driving until I reached a small town a few miles away. I pulled into a gas station and finally managed to get a signal on my phone. I called the police and reported the situation, giving them as much information as I could about the cabin and the men. I never thought a camping trip would turn out like this. My friend Emma and I had been driving all day to reach our campsite. The weather forecast had said there would be a storm, but we weren't too worried. We were both experienced campers, and we figured a little rain wouldn't hurt. As we drove deeper into the woods, the rain started coming down harder. It was almost a downpour by the time we reached the area where we planned to camp. We drove down a narrow, muddy road until we saw a clearing with a small, abandoned campsite. There was a tent, a few chairs, and some supplies scattered around. It looked like it had been left in a hurry. We figured it was a lucky find. We were soaked and tired, so we decided to use the spot for the night. We set up our own tent and started going through the supplies left behind. There were some cans of food, a couple of bottles of water, and a small propane stove. Everything seemed in good shape. We thought it was strange that the campsite was abandoned, but we didn't think too much of it. By the time we had everything set up and dinner started cooking, the rain was coming down even harder. We were inside our tent, listening to the storm, when we heard some noises outside. At first, it sounded like just the wind and the rain, but then we heard footsteps. We both froze, listening intently. The footsteps were getting closer. Emma and I exchanged worried glances. We hadn't seen anyone around when we arrived. I decided to peek outside the tent to see if I could spot anyone. I unzipped the tent door slowly and peeked out. The storm made it hard to see clearly, but I didn't spot anyone nearby. I closed the tent and locked it up. We tried to convince ourselves it was probably just someone else caught in the storm. We went back to eating, but neither of us could shake the uneasy feeling. The noises continued, faint but persistent. We heard what sounded like shuffling and muttering, and sometimes it seemed like the footsteps were circling around the tent. It was getting late, and the storm showed no sign of letting up. We decided to go to bed, but neither of us could sleep. Every little sound made us jump. We had a flashlight ready and kept checking outside. At one point, we heard a loud bang against the side of the tent. We both screamed and grabbed our flashlight, shining it in every direction. When we looked outside, we saw nothing but rain and darkness. I tried to call the ranger station to report something unusual, but my phone had no signal. Emma and I started to get really scared. We decided to wait out the night, hoping the noises would stop and we could leave in the morning. Around midnight, we heard the footsteps again. This time, they were louder and closer. I heard someone moving around the campsite. It sounded like they were rummaging through our supplies. I motioned for Emma to stay quiet, and we listened as the footsteps approached our tent. The sounds were so close that I could hear the person breathing. I wanted to look outside again, but I was too terrified. Emma and I huddled together, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The noises stopped for a while, and we thought maybe the person had left. But then we heard the sound of the tent zipper being slowly unzipped. I could barely breathe. The zipper stopped partway, and I could hear someone outside, clearly trying to get in. Emma was crying quietly. I tried to keep calm and think of what to do. I wanted to call for help, but my phone still had no signal. I decided to try and make a run for it. I told Emma my plan, and we got ready to leave. We waited until the sounds outside seemed to fade away a bit. Then, we unzipped the tent very carefully and crawled out. The rain was still pouring, and we quickly grabbed what we could and ran towards the car. I was looking around, expecting to see someone at any moment. The footsteps started again, closer this time, and I knew someone was coming after us. We reached the car and I fumbled with the keys, trying to unlock it as quickly as I could. The rain was coming down so hard it was almost impossible to see. Emma was already inside, and I jumped in just as I heard someone shouting behind us. I started the car and slammed on the gas, driving away from the campsite as fast as I could. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a figure standing in the rain, watching us drive away. I didn't stop until we were far from the campsite and the storm had started to ease. We drove to the nearest town and found a small motel to stay in for the night. We were both exhausted and shaken. We reported the incident to the local authorities, but they never found anyone at the campsite. They said it was probably just someone messing with us, but Emma and I knew better. We left the area the next morning and didn't look back. I've never been more afraid than I was that night. I went camping alone to unwind after a stressful few weeks. The forecast said it would rain, but I didn't think much of it. I had my tent, some supplies, and I was ready for a peaceful weekend. When I arrived at the campsite, the rain had already started. It was a light drizzle at first, so I set up my tent quickly, hoping the weather would clear up. As I finished, the rain started coming down harder. I had just started to make dinner when I heard someone calling out. I looked outside and saw a man approaching through the rain. He was soaked and looked like he needed help. He said he was a fellow camper who had lost his way. His clothes were tattered, and he looked like he had been out in the rain for a while. I was a bit hesitant but decided to let him join me since he looked desperate and I didn't want to leave him out in the storm. He introduced himself as Tom and thanked me for letting him in. I offered him some of my food, and we sat by the campfire, trying to stay warm and dry. We talked about our reasons for camping and made small talk. He seemed friendly enough, though something about him made me uneasy. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a storm making me paranoid. As the night went on, the rain got heavier and the wind picked up. Tom seemed increasingly agitated, glancing around nervously. I asked if he was all right, and he said he was just worried about the storm. His answers were quick and his body language seemed off. I tried to relax, telling myself he was just a bit shaken from being out in the rain. Eventually, he started talking about his past, and that's when I began to feel really uneasy. He mentioned that he had been in trouble before and that he had been running from some bad situations. I didn't think much of it at first, but then he made a strange comment about having to keep moving. It didn't sit right with me. Around midnight, as the rain continued to pour, Tom started acting even stranger. He kept checking his phone, though there was no signal. He seemed to be waiting for something or someone. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then I heard a noise outside the tent. It sounded like footsteps moving around, but with the storm, it was hard to tell. Tom went silent and his demeanor changed. He told me to stay quiet and not make any noise. My heart started racing. I tried to ask him what was going on, but he just shushed me. I could hear the footsteps getting closer. Tom whispered that we might be in danger and that we needed to hide. I was terrified and confused. He motioned for me to stay still while he peered outside through a small opening in the tent. His face was pale, and he looked scared. The footsteps stopped right outside our tent. I held my breath, waiting for what felt like an eternity. I could see the light from the storm flashing through the fabric of the tent. The footsteps started again, and this time, they were moving around our tent. I wanted to scream but couldn't. Tom suddenly pulled out a small, concealed weapon from his bag. I had no idea he had it, and it made me even more scared. He said he had to protect himself. I asked him who he was running from, and he hesitated before telling me he was an escaped prisoner. My blood ran cold. The situation became clearer to me. The noises outside were not just the wind and rain, they were people looking for him. I felt a mix of fear and panic. I knew I had to get out of there, but I didn't want to risk alerting anyone outside or causing a commotion. Tom was pacing nervously and kept muttering to himself. He said he had to get out before they found him and that we needed to leave now. I was frozen with fear, not sure what to do. I quietly gathered my things, trying not to make any noise. When Tom thought the coast was clear, he unzipped the tent slightly and peeked outside. I could see the rain pouring heavily and the shadows of people moving around. Tom said we had to stay low and follow him, but I knew I couldn't trust him fully. With shaking hands, I grabbed my flashlight and followed him out of the tent. We moved cautiously through the rain, slipping and sliding on the muddy ground. I tried to keep my distance from Tom, not wanting to get too close. I was terrified of what might happen if he decided to turn on me. Tom led me through the forest, trying to avoid the people who were searching for him. I could hear voices and the sound of footsteps getting closer. We kept moving, making our way to a small clearing where Tom said we might be safe. In the clearing, I saw a road in the distance. I knew if I could get to the road, I might be able to get help. I made a quick decision and told Tom I was going to try and reach the road to call for assistance. He begged me to stay, saying it wasn't safe, but I knew I had to try. I ran through the rain towards the road, my heart pounding in my chest. I finally reached it and saw a car approaching. I waved my arms and managed to flag it down. The driver stopped, and I quickly explained the situation. The driver called the police and helped me get to safety. The police arrived at the campsite and conducted a search. They found Tom and took him into custody. They told me that he had a history of violent crimes and that I was lucky to have escaped without harm. I was shaken but relieved to be safe. I went camping alone in a remote area to clear my head. The forecast predicted heavy rain, but I didn't think it would be a big deal. I packed light, just enough to get through a couple of days. The drive up was okay, just a bit foggy. By the time I reached the campsite, the rain had started. I set up my tent and got a small fire going, hoping the rain would pass soon. I was looking forward to some quiet time, but then I heard another vehicle pulling into the area. I thought it was odd since this place was supposed to be fairly secluded. The person who got out of the vehicle was someone I recognized. Her name was Hannah. We hadn't spoken in years, not since a falling out we had over a mutual friend. She was a bit of a surprise, to say the least. She saw me and came over with a hesitant smile, as if trying to make peace. "Hey, Lisa," she said. "Fancy meeting you here." I was taken aback and didn't know how to respond. I managed a polite smile, but inside, I was wary. We exchanged some small talk. Hannah said she was here for the same reason I was, to get away from everything. I was unsure if I should be pleased to see her or concerned. The rain started coming down harder, so we decided to share the space around my fire. We talked about old times, but it was clear there was tension. I kept glancing at her, trying to read her mood. Something felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint it. As the night went on, the storm worsened. The wind howled and the rain beat against the trees. We retreated to our respective tents for the night. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling in my gut, but it wouldn't go away. Around midnight, I heard rustling outside my tent. I listened closely and could faintly hear someone moving around. I was too afraid to investigate. The noises continued for a while, and I could hear occasional whispers. My fear grew as I tried to convince myself it was just a storm. I eventually mustered the courage to peek out of the tent. Through the rain and wind, I saw Hannah standing by my tent, holding a flashlight. She was looking around, as if she was searching for something or someone. My heart raced. I tried to ignore it, thinking it might be nothing. But then, I saw her pull out a small bag and rummage through it. I couldn't see what she was doing, but it made me even more nervous. I quietly zipped my tent closed and tried to stay calm. The noises outside stopped, but I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing faint footsteps and whispers. The storm seemed to make everything more intense. I was on edge, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Eventually, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching my tent again. I held my breath and listened. The footsteps stopped right outside my tent. I could see the shadow of someone moving. I tried to stay as still as possible, praying they wouldn't notice me. The person outside started to unzip the tent. I could hear the sound of the zipper and my heart raced. I tried to stay quiet and make as little noise as possible. The zipper stopped midway, and I saw a shadow fall across the opening. A few moments later, the shadow moved away and the zipper went back up. I could hear muffled voices and the sound of things being moved around. My fear was overwhelming. I had to figure out what was happening and how to escape. I decided to quietly crawl to the back of the tent and see if there was a way out. I found a small opening and carefully pushed it open. The rain was still coming down hard. I moved slowly, trying not to make a sound, and peeked outside. Hannah was sitting by the fire now, her back to me. I saw that she had something in her hand, but it was too dark to make out what it was. I carefully backed away and went around the side of the tent, trying to stay hidden from view. I found a small path leading deeper into the woods and started to follow it. My heart was pounding, and the rain made everything slippery and difficult to navigate. I was soaked through and shivering, but I knew I had to keep moving. As I made my way through the trees, I heard voices again. They were closer now, and I realized Hannah wasn't alone. It sounded like there were other people with her. I moved as quietly as I could, trying to avoid being seen. I finally reached a small clearing and saw a road in the distance. I knew if I could get to the road, I might be able to find help. I moved as quickly as the rain and darkness allowed, hoping I wouldn't run into anyone. When I reached the road, I saw headlights approaching. I waved my arms frantically, and the car pulled over. I quickly explained the situation to the driver, who was kind enough to call the police for me. The police arrived not long after, and I led them back to the campsite. Hannah and her accomplices were found and taken into custody. They had been planning something dangerous, and I was lucky to have escaped in time. I decided to go camping alone to clear my head. Life had been getting overwhelming, and I needed a break from everything. I picked a spot near a quiet forest, far from the usual camping spots. The weather was iffy, but I wasn't too worried about a bit of rain. I arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon, and the rain had just started. It was one of those steady drizzles that seemed to soak everything through. I set up my tent and made a small fire. The rain was coming, in a way, but it did make the whole forest feel isolated. That night, I noticed a car parked a little ways from my site. It seemed out of place, but I thought maybe someone else was camping nearby. I didn't think much of it. I just went to bed early, feeling tired from the drive and setting up camp. Around midnight, the rain picked up. It was coming down hard, and the sound of it hitting the tent was almost deafening. I tried to sleep, but the noise made it hard. After a while, I heard something outside, voices. I thought I was hearing things at first, but then I definitely heard a man's voice. I decided to peek out. I unzipped the tent just enough to look outside. Through the rain, I saw flashlights and shadows moving around near the car. It was too dark to see much, but it looked like a group of people was there. I zipped the tent back up and tried to ignore it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The voices grew louder, and I could hear them talking about something being hidden in the woods. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I grabbed my flashlight and went out into the rain. I moved quietly, trying to stay hidden behind trees. I followed the voices and saw the group of people huddled around the car. They were talking in low, urgent tones. I got closer and saw that they were unloading boxes from the trunk. They looked like ordinary boxes, but something about the way they handled them made me uneasy. They were clearly hiding something important. I tried to get a better look but stayed out of sight. One of them suddenly looked up, and I froze. It felt like they could see me, even though I was hidden. I quickly backed away and tried to find a place to hide. I found a small grove of trees and crouched down, my heart racing. I watched as the group moved the boxes into the forest. It was clear now that they were up to something illegal. They were very careful about their movements, making sure no one could see what they were doing. As they disappeared into the woods, I decided I needed to get out of there. I turned to head back to my camp, but as I did, I noticed something. One of the men was coming in my direction. I panicked and tried to find a hiding spot. I ducked behind a large tree, trying to stay as still as possible. The man walked past me, and I could hear him muttering to himself about someone having seen them. My stomach dropped. I was the one who had seen them. The man went back to the group, and I waited until he was out of sight. I was soaked through and shivering, but I knew I had to get back to my tent and call for help. I moved quickly, keeping an eye out for anyone who might notice me. When I got back to my tent, I grabbed my phone and tried to call the police. The signal was weak, and it took several tries before I could get through. I explained what I had seen and gave them my location, hoping they would get there in time. While I waited, I heard more voices outside. It sounded like the group was moving closer to my camp. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized they might have figured out I was nearby. I stayed in the tent, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The rain was still coming down hard, and I could hear the sound of footsteps outside. I was terrified they would find me and realize I had seen them. The minutes felt like hours. I kept my phone in hand, ready to call for help if needed. The voices eventually faded away, and I dared to peek outside. I couldn't see anyone, but I knew I had to stay hidden. I heard sirens in the distance and felt a wave of relief. The police arrived not long after, and I saw their flashlights cutting through the rain. I carefully stepped out of the tent and flagged them down. The officers were quick to search the area. They found the car and the boxes the group had been moving. It turned out to be a large-scale drug operation. The criminals were caught, and the evidence was seized. I was shaken but relieved that the danger had passed. The police took my statement, and I was eventually able to pack up and head home. The experience left me on edge for a while, but I was glad to have made it out safely. The rain had stopped by the time I left, and the sun was starting to come up. I drove away from the campsite with a sense of unease, knowing I had narrowly escaped a dangerous situation.